So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the 5th edition of the Career Compass. Now we do have a bit of an anniversary this year. And before I continue with this introduction, it's really important to remind all that this is being recorded. So as usual, this event is co-organized by the EEM board and the current fellows, and traditionally this has been always a very informal and casual event, so we're hoping that this year this can continue. And it's always been a discussion between current fellow alumni and also friends of the network, the EPIET and EUPHEM Alumni Network. So hence this is mostly fellowship focused. However, bear in mind that we do have, the event is open to all escaide attendants, so we do have a mixed audience. So me, myself, Sofia Igloi, who is a EUPHEM, I was a EUPHEM alumnus, I am a EUPHEM alumnus from cohort 2016, and I represent the EM board, and my fellow moderator.
Hi, I'm Joaquin, and I'm an EPIET fellow in Malta.
We will be your moderators tonight, and we do have Katja Schilling, who is also EPIET cohort 2020 in the background, who is helping with the questions, what's coming in the chat. So just to briefly outline the event, how we are playing tonight. So this event is really aimed at early mid-career public health and also microbiology, public health microbiology professionals. We do have 1.5 hours to discuss. And following this this welcome and brief introduction also from the panel, we will already dive into the questions. And because we do have limited time, we do ask people, and that's also from the audience, and to keep the question, and also from the panelists to try to keep the answers. Keep the questions broad, however, informative and also concise. Now I hand it over to Joaquin.
Thanks. So I have the housekeeping details. We will have a limit of 300 people in this meeting. I think right now we have 100, and hopefully we reach that limit. And speakers and moderators are encouraged to keep their cameras on during the presentation. And the questions will primarily come in the chat, but if there are participants who would like to actively participate in the discussion, I think that's highly encouraged. Feel free to raise your hand, then we will give you the floor, and feel free to turn on your cameras, microphones, and just speak. And I'm very excited. Tonight we have a very, very prestigious panel, and we are very happy that you have taken the time out of your busy agendas to join us. And I'm going to introduce each one of them alphabetically, and then they will be asked to introduce themselves. But we have Dr. Chikwe Ihekweazu, who is an Assistant Director General for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence, and he is leading the new hub in Berlin for WHO. And he was part of the cohort on 2003. Then we have Professor Marion Koopmans, who is the head of Viroscience Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam. And she has been involved in the fellowship in many ways, and I'm sure she will be very excited to discuss about it. And then we have Dr. Mike Ryan, who is the Executive Director of the WHO Health Emergency Program, and he was an EPIET Fellow in Cohort 2. And back to you, Sophia.
Right, so without further ado, I would like to ask the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, briefly reeling, let's say, I know it's difficult, but let's say in 2 minutes. And if you could involve in these 2 minutes, like what are you doing these days and how you came to hold this position. I don't know who will want to start. Ladies first.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, so, well, I'm Marion Koopmans, as you said. I'm currently the director of the Viroscience department, but that is after a long trip through virology, public health, virology, academia, application. So I have done my training as a veterinarian, then specialized doing a PhD in virology, but from a clinical perspective, specialized as an internal medicine specialist, but in veterinary medicine. Then after my PhD, worked in clinical practice for a while, and then got into further. Well, I got grappled by, or really intrigued by, understanding viruses. So I applied for a research position in the US and ended up at the US CDC with a visiting fellowship and then visiting scientist position for a couple of years. Then got back to the Netherlands to start a position at the RIVM, National Institute of Public Health. Made it gradually into the head of virology there. So really public health virology, and that's also the time that I really started to work with EPIET fellows, but also said, okay, but we need people like this also in the lab side. So we need lab people that also really get what it is to do public health work. So that made me a co-founder of the EUPHEM program, so the sister program to EPIET. And I still think that's really important. So you need people that think across the bridges from both ends, epidemiology, lab, maybe also clinical, to really work together and work through things together. And from there, I moved back to academia, where I'm now, but still very much trying to see how we can build bridges, collaborate in the whole partnership that I think is needed in trying to understand infectious diseases in many, many different ways.
Thank you, Marion.
Okay, I'll go next, so we save the best for last. I'm Chikwe Ihekweazu. I started my career in Nigeria as a clinician after medical school. I moved to Germany about 21 years ago. Or 22, did a master's here and got my first job in Berlin at the Robert Koch Institute. And then spent the next years transiting through 4 national public health institutes, Germany, obviously, the UK, South Africa, and ended up in Nigeria, where I led the Nigeria Center for Disease Control for the past 5 years. In between, I did EPIET, selected from Germany and sent to the UK. I was the first fellow in a regional site in the UK, the Southwest region, where James Stewart was my supervisor. I was in the last cohort that had Alain Morin as a EPIET coordinator, together with Arnold Bosman. So I had an exciting 2 years in EPIET and then completed the public health training program in the UK as well, immediately after EPIET. Recently, I took up, in fact, this is my third week on the job as Assistant Director General at the WHO, working in the Emergencies program and leading the new hub for pandemic intelligence, pandemic and epidemic intelligence in Berlin. So really look forward to this session. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now, lastly but not lately, but not lastly, Mike.
Good. I think myself and Chikwe have had sort of parallel careers intertwined at various times. My name is Mike Marion. I'm the Executive Director for the Emergencies Program here at WHO in Geneva. And I started as medical training, and we'll probably come on to talk about career paths and planning, the least planned career ever. Trained first in surgery, had a very bad car accident, ended up going into public health, did a master's in University College Dublin, then went to the UK and joined the Higher Specialist Training Program in Communicable Diseases and Public Health at the CDSC then. I think it was still called CDSC in your days, Chikwe. Yep. I think it's changed its name to PHA, PHE, and it's changed. Yeah. But and just a note for all of you out there, the passing of Dr. Chris Bartlett in the last week. Chris was one of the founders of EPIET and was the director of CDSC for a decade, and one of the real transformational drivers of change in public health systems in the UK, and one of the founders of European Union Epidemiology and Data Exchange and CDS and those of you who did know Chris, I think his funeral was on the 17th or 18th of November, just to say that passing of someone who was a major contributor to EPIET, and I trained under Chris and many others, including James Stewart as well, Chikwe, yeah, and we had the pleasure of hosting James here last week on meningitis. Does incredible work now globally on meningitis. Another feature of EPIET, not only EPIET trainees, but the trainers themselves are everywhere as well, both in national and global environments. But from CDSC, I joined EPIET, and I got traded. I don't know if everyone knows the story. I was supposed to go and work with Johan Giesecke in Stockholm, and I ended up having a serendipitous meeting with David Heyman, who was setting up a new emerging disease program in Geneva. And David Heyman traded me and got half the money, I think, from the EPI program and half the money from himself. And then I ended up working 200% for 2 years as an EPIET fellow in Geneva, having at 2 weeks' notice having to switch from moving to Sweden to moving to Geneva. So I've been finally promoted to my own personal level of managerial and competence, and I'm now the executive director of the program here in Geneva.
Thank you very much for all the introductions. And now we can actually start diving into the questions. And I will abuse my position and I will allow myself to ask the first question also until then people can ask the questions come in. So my question is really that knowing, and actually I don't know if I can really imagine how busy you are. Why did you take the time to join us tonight?
I can start. I probably wouldn't be where I am today without EPIET. So if EPIET called, I had an obligation to answer. And I mean that with all sincerity. You know, and it's not just about the technical training, the friends, the mentorship, the camaraderie, the family, the friendship that has evolved over 20 years. So for me, unless there was a life and death incident that prevented me from coming, it wasn't really a question at all on whether I should come or not.
Yeah, for me, EPIET was a huge, it was an amazing experience, and not just in terms of the opportunities afforded us, but I think the way Papa Alain in his time and others had a very evolved view of active investigational public health, you know, very driven, you know, data driven, you know, driven by that ability to impact policy and impact change and change the way we serve people by using our ability to collect, analyze data. And that wasn't always built into public health training in other countries, in general, in individual countries. It was very much based on multidisciplinary efforts, not all doctors, you know, a mixture of scientists. I think in my cohort we had pharmacists, scientists, chemists. We had such a cohort of people from the lab and other side. So I think that inclusive nature of EPIET and I just think the fun we had in EPIET is the reason I'm here tonight. And I think everyone in every cohort has had that, although I feel sorry for the cohorts over the last couple of years, because I'm sure it's been extra hard work and no chance to do the magical convenings that EPIET has done. So I haven't been I haven't been very faithful to EPIET in the sense of my involvement with the alumni network, but I'm extremely proud of my time with EPIET and tried to live up to its expectations and ever since.
So maybe for me, of course, I'm a different bird. I have not gone through EPIET, but I have helped launch what I felt was an important other pillar together with David Brown, then in the EVD lab network, where we said, okay, but we really need these kind of people also on the laboratory side. So we wrote what we felt would be our future, the people that we need, our successors. So the people in the laboratory side that can bridge between basic laboratory and clinical laboratories and public health laboratories. And I'm just, you know, I was passionate about that then. I'm passionate about that now. Well, when you asked the question, I was just happy to join.
Yeah, I have to say that we were all very happy when we got those responses right away. It was very exciting for all of us. And actually, there is a question in the chat from Lisa Hansen about, given that you all come from very different sides into EPI, how do you think that your career paths have changed during the time of your career? How have these EPI paths have changed during the path of your career? And there is also a shout out to you, Marion, for being a vet, which I have to echo, I have to say.
Well, maybe so again, this is rather than epidemiology, so public health microbiology. I think so. I'm looking, I haven't followed the tracks of every graduate, but I do see graduates in very different roles, but I do think I would be really interested in hearing their perspectives, but I do think the EUPHEM thinking, the translational thinking, really is an asset. So I have two graduates in my own team in the department, and I think it shows me it brings just a different type of competency that is important. So I know that certainly the EUPHEM fellows have had a bit of difficulty in seeing where is our types of positions, but certainly if we look now at what how important these crossbreeds are in the whole pandemic response, I think that only will increase. It's just a matter of time before, I think this is really showing just how important it is to have people that understand different worlds, and that can work across, and so I'm pretty sure that the career opportunities will only increase.
Mike, you want to go?
You're muted, Mike.
Oh no, you go ahead, Chikwe.
Okay, no, I'll very briefly. Most of us that study medicine, public health in itself is not even an option. Most of us go into medical school with the narrative of managing the patient in front of you. At some point, if you're lucky, you get exposed to the complex world of public health, and then you start narrowing down and expanding your horizons. And every time you do that, it just brings so much excitement, because in medical school, you're taught that there is an answer to a question. You learn those answers, and in public health it's different. You deal with complexity every day. And then the second thing is, even within public health, and what we're learning now especially, is that even that is no longer enough. Look at this pandemic that we're facing. The complexity of issues that we have to integrate to make decisions means that we have to understand social sciences and respect so many other diverse professions that we may not instinctively have considered as necessary in our career paths from the beginning. So, it's just exciting to be part of this transition from very narrow career pathways to the complexity that is required today to deal with current challenges. And so that's where we are.
Yeah, I think Marion and Chikwe have laid it out very well. In Ireland, there's a saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And I think it takes a village to respond to a pandemic or to deal with public health challenges. And it's not just one person or one family. And I think you need that multidisciplinary approach. And I love having people here who come from eclectic backgrounds. We have people here who, you know, from NGO backgrounds, people, engineers, we have biomedical engineers, virologists, clinicians, nurses, security experts, logisticians, you know, and no one, you know, they bring something to what we do in public health. They bring what we're, you know, what we're trying to do is serve the populations we serve. And our job is to keep the world safe, keep countries safe by, you know, detecting, responding to, containing, mitigating the impacts of health emergencies in our case. And in the case of other public health practitioners, you know, much more directed towards long-term health policy. So you can't do that with a single profession or a single pillar or a single craft. It's a multi-crafted thing. And I think EPIET started out and EUPHEM started out with that idea. Take people in who've had interesting lives, interesting careers, and finish off that training and learning with an immersive approach to giving them the crossover skills that they need. And less didactic. Anyone that's come into these two programs, you know, they're smart people by definition, and they've had interesting backgrounds. They're self-motivated. You don't have to sit them down in front of lectures and start teaching them. What you need to do is really imbue people with the spirit of, you know, courage and inquisitiveness, and bring in a method, bring in an approach to how we address public health challenges. And if you're doing that properly, then you're bringing different disciplines together to do that. So, and I think the career opportunities have never been greater. Unfortunately, it's probably taken a massive pandemic and God knows how many other crises. But now, as we face climate change, as we face pandemic risks, as we face social inequity and conflict and fragility all over the world, public health has never been more important. And I don't mean public health as a single profession, but the health of the public and everything that affects it and everything that science can bring to improve and protect health. So there's never been a moment. In fact, this is the moment in which all of us, and I think in the two movements highlighted here tonight and in other training platforms, we've all been able to deploy our skills over the last 2 years, be it locally, nationally, globally. And thank God for programs like EUPHEM and EPIET, because they've given a lot of us the real basics and the approach and the methodology to be able to do what we're doing today.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I see that Marion Mühlen has her hands up. Marion, would you mind speaking up and ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Sophie. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Did I do it right? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So thank you very much, Marion and Mike. You talked about really these hybrids and these many different professions coming together. And in this FETP world, since we're talking about also, you know, the career of FETPs, we're also now currently developing competencies under the One Health perspective for FETPs, for applied epidemiology. And as you mentioned, so many factors, and we see in the COVID pandemic that there are so many environmental, animal, and food and feed, so many factors feed in to human public health that we cannot disregard it anymore. That's how I feel. There's no way to continue just in this human health focus, disregarding what is happening around us in the environment and in the animal world. So if we embark on something like a One Health FETP, what would you think is the best place to start? Because we've been having discussions. Should we start in the surveillance part? Should we start in the emergency part? How do we bring all these different actors together? And should we create a new program, or should we try to transform the programs we have already? So back to you. Thank you.
Marion, you want to have a go at that one first? Because you work very much at the animal-human interface and environment interface in your day-to-day work.
So that's a tough one. Of course, there's veterinary public health programs in the different countries. So I think that might be a starting point for such a program. look at, and I'm pretty sure that there could be an interesting parallel to the public health traineeship. Having said that, I think that already in part is happening, so that type of combination in the current training, right? Because different countries have already the links with veterinary institutes, and some of the public health institutes have a bit of a hybrid model. What I think if you think about One Health angle and One Health studies, also now looking at the global new genomic surveillance programs that are developing, I think that there's additional new partnerships. There's the bioinformatics world. There's so you actually see the angle, so the combination with academia, academic, public health, veterinary health, environmental health partnerships. So I think maybe looking at the pandemic now, that also is an opportunity to see what additional skill sets would really be useful, and not taking people all into the public health, but looking at how we really need the connections. So we may need to have the public health pillars, veterinary health pillars, academic pillars, really developing this further together. That would be my, I think, my wish, actually.
Yeah, I like the idea of a One Health fellowship. I might apply for that one myself when I finish up here. It sounds excellent. I think if you see One Health as that sort of, if you see One Health as that integrated sort of approach that seeks optimal outcomes for animals, humans, and ecosystem, right? Not just referring back to, sometimes it refers too much back to human health. One Health is all about human health and how it's affected by other things. I think we have to have a much broader sense. We affect the ecosystem, we affect the planet, we affect the animals that we engage with, be it for food or just for day to day. So and they impact on us. And I think that idea of bringing that together and having a much better understanding of that and cross-training people, and you're right, Marion, the veterinary public health side there's quite a bit of cross-training. I mean, I remember Paul Fine at the London schools is a veterinarian. I always think the best human epidemiologists are vets by training, because they're programmed to think in populations, right? We have to be deprogrammed as medics. We're taught about the patient. We nearly have to be we're almost like we've been in the Moonies, and we have to be sort of deprogrammed into a population-based thinking again. Whereas veterinarians think from the very outset in terms of populations. And I think veterinary public health can bring a lot to human public health in the approach. And I think, as I said, I would love to. I don't think there's any one solution of saying we should abandon everything we do now and all jump on a One Health training program. And equally, I don't think we have enough. And I think the diversity of programs available to people to be able to cross-train, should continue to increase. But the other thing I think we just need to be cautious of. I consider myself to be someone cross-trained. I mean, part of my training was in a lab, part of my training in the wards, part of my training in a surveillance center, and that's great. I have that understanding, but I'm not an expert in any of that. I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, and I'm specifically designed to work in a public health program like in WHO, where that skill of being able to understand and accept and recognize all of the value of those different professions and be able to work across is really important. But that doesn't get us away from having super specialists. I don't want a world that depends on Mike Ryans to develop the next vaccine or the next diagnostic, because it ain't coming, right? Because I don't have the skills. So I think what we have to find is the right mix between the specialisms we need. And you know this, Marion, more than anyone. You need now in clinical virology, it's not just clinical, you're in a very specific area, either in an organ or you're in a particular set of viruses. And we need that specialization, and we need that super specialization if we're to innovate right at the edges of human knowledge. But that needs to be then integrated into what we do in health and public health. And our job, I think, as people, particularly coming from these programs, is to be the messengers across that divide, to bring, you know, upstream innovation, to bring in, be it in data, be it in laboratory medicine or science, to be able to bring that and walk that through the process of translating that in evidence to knowledge into practice and into policy, and being able to do that. That's, to me, is the biggest, you know, challenge the likes of myself and Chikwe face. We can be the best data analysts in the world here sitting in Geneva, but unless we're able to influence what our member states decide each year at the World Health Assembly, unless that's going to influence global strategies, then it's meaningless. So I think it's having that diversity of programs and training, recognizing that specialization is really important. But if everyone is in their own silo and we can't integrate knowledge and we can't integrate policy, then we're not going to get anywhere either. So finding that balance between that is really important for me.
Chikwe, would you like to add anything else to this?
No, I think that question is very well answered. So
okay.
Yeah.
So on that same line, I'm going to take the liberty to merge two questions. There's one from Timothy and one from Lisa, which are on skills to develop for current fellows. And the one from Timothy is, which ones would you like, or which ones do you think that we should develop? And the one from Lisa is actually both congratulating your great communication skills and asking, how should we develop those?
Okay, maybe I can shoot. To be honest, I think the world we're going into, there's no skill that any of us wants to develop that we cannot, right? So I think the future will not depend on how much skills you have in one area versus the other, unless that's kind of your career path and you want to push down that path, like Mike said. But for an EPIET fellow, it's really how you combine all of that. And also have the courage and the confidence to explore others and to throw yourself, or to be thrown into the deep end in situations in a safe space with a supervisor, with a network that then allows you to learn from all of that. So I think that's the strength of EPIET. And, you know, the more recent fellows, Mike had one cohort ahead of him, I had 8, but now you guys have close to 30 probably, people that are committed to fellows and are there to help and to support. Sometimes I think we don't use our network enough. Yes, the formal uses of the network through the conferences and EAN, but there's the informal too, and you know, people can reach out all the time. And whenever I've met fellows or alumni in all sorts of places, either I've met an EPIET alumni that was on an MSF team in northern Nigeria, and I was coming as from the NCDC side, and you know, we recognize each other, and it completely changes the dynamic in terms of how we work together. So I think the most important skill for all of us now is the softer skills, is how to get the best out of ourselves, our network, and use that to improve our ability to do our jobs. In terms of how good you are at logistic regression or genomics, any of that we can learn through whatever opportunities are available these days.
Yeah, I think going on to the communication side, I mean, yeah, some of us get more exposed than we would like to the frontline communications, and that's an important function. And if you're a leader in public health, or you're a leader in science, it is part of your job to communicate that. And sometimes that's at major conferences, but sometimes that's in local webinars. And probably most challengingly for us in our profession is communicating to politicians and government and influencing policy and influencing decisions. And that's something we need to take really seriously. There's no point in the smartest person in the room and the person with all the data and the person with all the solutions. If you can't communicate that in that 5 minutes or that 10 minutes, and you haven't worked at that, and you're not able to synthesize what you're trying to communicate, and to understand that sometimes you're not just communicating what you know, and that's easy enough to do. I know something, now I'll find a way to communicate it. You need to communicate the outcome that you're looking for, and you need to get other people to buy into that with you as you communicate. So I think it's and then you obviously have the media and that representational role. And I do think increasingly in our world, we have to be excellent communicators. And it's not, some people have a natural gift and they're able to do it very easily. But as it's a craft, it's a skill. You might not ever be the world's greatest communicator, but it is a skill you need and one which you can develop. You just have to work at it. We all went through our undergraduate years and we all struggled at some subjects, but at the end of the day, you got to pass them all. You know, you can't flunk one and qualify and graduate. And I think this is one. And yeah, you might not have it down on your list of favorite things I've ever done, but communication and communications is an essential part of our profession nowadays. And if you feel, and sometimes in life, the best way to progress is not take the best thing, you know, and advance that, but take your greatest fear and your greatest weakness. You know, those of you sitting there tonight, think of the thing that really makes you feel uncomfortable. The one area you think, oh my God, I hope I don't have to do that. Or, you know, and many of us, I think, would say that communications is probably that. You know, I'm happy on the writing the papers, and I'm happy analyzing the data, and I'm happy formulating the policies, but don't put me in front of the media, or don't put me in a government committee where everyone's going to criticize me and where I'm going to take the heat. But that's the reality. If we want to influence policy and we want to influence the direction of health, we want to influence the way our society develops and the equity within our societies, then we have to speak up. And sometimes we have to be courageous, and sometimes we should always be evidence-based. But we should also sometimes have to speak truth to power. And the hardest thing any of you will ever do is being able to say uncomfortable things to people who really don't want to hear them. But you have to have the courage to do that. But you must learn techniques of delivering that in a way that you have a hope that you will change the minds of the people you're talking to. And I think it's something we need to learn to do much better as a collective. And we should invest much more in our training programs and getting those skills across.
Marion, would you want to comment on how did you become the communicator you are? Did you ever receive a formal training, or is it something, as Mike said, you kind of grow into it and you develop it as a skill?
I did do some training. I did always enjoy it. I was very much encouraged to engage in, you know, trying to explain science sort of to lay audiences by my thesis advisor, who was a champion of that himself. So he just sent me to give talks to lay audiences. And I have done also media training, getting grilled by journalists, tricked into many of the common tricks that journalists use. But other than that, it's really just giving it a try. And I'm very, I mean, I think it's not easy. So it's the type of communication I do is more about trying to explain the science behind why are things done the way they are done, what is the scientific basis, what do we know, what do we not know. And I try to I prepare a lot. For every and any question that I get, that's why I like getting a lot of lay questions, because they are, you know, the weirdest questions, and very often you just don't know the answers. So you really have to think about it. So what is this? What do I know? And that really helps. So that I do that a lot, because it really makes me think, and it helps, you know, explaining what you know and what you don't know. I think it's also a lot of practice.
And you also talked a lot about multidisciplinary and all sorts of that being diverse. That's one of the things that it really makes this fellowship, and not just the fellowship, I mean the community itself, really strong. And there's a question in the chat which is asking about, however, depending in which position you are landing, it's not always your employer doesn't always understand what multidiscipline is or how to make it happen. So what would be your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure what exactly the question is here.
The question is that it was raised that, multidisciplinary is important, and also working with all the other parties, but sometimes the employer doesn't necessarily support it or doesn't understand how to make these links. So let's say it's part of your job that, yes, you should work with other groups, but however, there are issues. The issues can be at multiple levels.
Sure, and I'm sure everyone has come across that, and it's part of life, right? But you learn something from, hey, maybe this is an environment that's not really helping me, but then maybe they also lose out on something. So it's really, I think it's about in every environment trying to pick up something that helps you understand, okay, so what is the role of this particular place where I'm at in that bigger system, and how can I then connect still? Because even if that's not, I mean, of course, that happens in academia, where you can be very much really, it can be steered into silos because that's how the career paths look, but there's diversity there as well. And I think, like yourself, you're working in an academic environment now. You learn if you move on to a different job, which I hope not you're doing, but you learn how this world works. That is also part of, it is a player in the whole scheme of things. And if you move on to a different position, you have learned how to deal with people in that kind of environment. So I think that's how these different experiences really build your career eventually. I get the question now a lot, how do you know what you know? And I'm, if I'm thinking, I know a little bit from when I was a vet, when I did my PhD, when I worked in India, when I worked in Africa. You pick up little bits and pieces of knowledge everywhere, and that really, develops into the skill set that you use. So
we do all at some stage in our careers, end up working for the Luddites, the person who just wants to extract as much work from you as possible and really says, this is your job and this is what you have to do. And they have a very narrow view on the world. Probably happens more in academia, where it shouldn't really happen, than anywhere else. I think in general in public health institutes, they've evolved. I'd find it hard to think that there are public health institutes in Europe, for example, now that don't have a multidisciplinary approach. They will be so out of line with what the thing is. But we all end up also in situations where we feel constrained under one supervisor or whatever. But, the skill here, I think, for us all is to understand that you're not just working under one supervisor. You've got networks out there, you've got colleagues, you've got ways of initiating activities and projects. You can be a little bit disruptive in the sense without being disrespectful. And I think that's the idea, is to not accept if someone puts you in a box and says you're going to sit there for the next 2 years and enter data. Yeah, you may have to do that because you got to pay the bills, but there are ways for you then to reach out, find other ways to create what you want in terms of projects and everything else. So you have to be creative. I certainly have had experience of those kinds of bosses who just really want to extract as much juice from the orange as they can, and they're really not that interested in your future career. You're a foot soldier, and that can be very stressful, because sometimes, especially in the earlier part of your career, you're trying to learn, you're trying to get as much experience as possible. You want to engage with others, but someone is forcing you into a kind of a repetitive sort of mode of delivery, and that can be very, very stressful, particularly if you end up like, for example, an EPIET role where you have a precious couple of years and you really have these expectations, and then all of a sudden you're not doing what you expected to do, and you're just repeating live, die, repeat every day. So I would also say if you're in one of these training programs and you find yourself in a situation like that, you need to act too, and you need to come back to the program and say, this isn't working, this isn't working for me, and this isn't consistent with the program. You're not being disruptive. You're not being disrespectful. You have a responsibility in programs like EPIET and EUPHEM and others to get the training that was planned and designed for you, not just for you, but for the nations who invest in this project. And there's an outcome that's needed. So I would say if people feel, I don't know if there are people out there, but again, it's back to this speaking truth to power. It's the hardest thing in the world as a trainee to speak up and try and shape the program that's supposed to be training. You're expected to sit there and be very grateful for everything you receive. And that's what's so important about the Alumni Network, I think, to speak up for trainees. And if there are issues and difficulties, particularly with individual institutes, I think it is important that trainees and the Alumni Network, point that out.
Plus, training is always a bilateral process, right? It's as a supervisor, you also learn from your trainees. But a condition there is that you hear back. So and that the conditions need to be there, of course. But I think that's really important.
So there is a question. No, sorry, not a question. There's a hand up by Katia. Katia, do you want to take the floor?
Thank you, Joaquin, and thank you to the panelists. It's super interesting to hear your wisdom and experience.
Oh,
we lost her.
Yeah, lost.
Maybe she could type the question in the chat.
Yes, I found it, so I can read it up. Okay. When you started your career, what was your goal in terms of your career? And from your experience of public health, is it more appreciated to stay with one organization or work your way up, so to say, in quotes, or to change employers and try out different roles?
Anyone who had a plan, please answer, because I had no plan. Okay, so.
No.
I not only had no plan, but I literally fell into different opportunities. I mean, when I got my first RKI job, it was one out of 50 applications. And somehow I ended up in a project on nosocomial infections, which I'd never heard about in Nigeria because hospital-acquired infections weren't actually a priority in those days. So, and then, getting into EPIET, to be honest, I wasn't looking for a role in the Southwest. I was aiming for Collindale, which everyone wanted to go. And there was this new site somewhere in the Southwest. I drove out there, saw more cows in the fields than humans and wondered, I'll die of boredom here. But, I had a fantastic time with James Stewart in a regional site, which was an exception at the time. When the opportunity came to South Africa, at that time, the HPA was not engaging internationally in global health. It was the very first time they were seconding anyone, anywhere. So, there wasn't a lot of interest and organization around it or support. I took a leap of faith and ended up in SA, which then led to my role in Nigeria. So I think the great thing about EPIET is it throws up opportunities for you, and the challenge is you have to take them. And very often it doesn't come at a convenient time. You might be, you've just started paying for a mortgage or a family or all sorts of things that are also important. Is how do you manage all of that and still allow yourself to sometimes, pack your bags, get out there and get the experience you need that will then take you to the next step.
Yeah, the planning is, I wish I had a plan. What did Mike Tyson say? Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face.
The first time, yeah.
And, a lot of us in our lives, for all kinds of personal and professional reasons, it's a road less traveled, and it's a journey, and you need to enjoy the journey. If you're destination driven in career, then you'll probably never enjoy yourself because you'll never get to your destination. So I think you have to kind of celebrate what you're doing right now. The only thing I want to know is how can I be an EPIET fellow in Malta? That's one I'd like, you know. So I think, and it's not about callously taking opportunities. It's about being alert and aware of what's going on around you and what path something could take you on, and realizing that a path you take isn't the final path. You may come back around the road again, and it won't be wasted. We all fear this idea of wasting our time. Oh, if I do this and I go down this path, and then I'll have wasted 4 years, and oh, then I won't be. And we can build ourselves up into a kind of a frenzy of doubt, of always having to make the right decision. If you're waiting around to make the right decision, you'll have missed 1,000 opportunities along the way. So I think it's a matter of being aware of what you are, who you are as a person, what you're trying to achieve, and taking those opportunities that come your way, knowing full well you can come back the road and do something else. When I was injured in 1990, doing surgery and very serious back injuries, I thought my life was over. I really, really did. I thought all this medical training, all the expense, all the loans, all that. And here I am, you know, multiple spinal fractures, and my career is finished. And I was very, very depressed. I was really, really, it was at that point 10 years of hard work. You know, and I'm the first person in my family ever to go to university. So you can imagine, you know, that feeling that weight of responsibility too towards my family and achieving things and needing to achieve. And it took a long time to step back and take another path. And I'm so glad it happened. My 92-year-old grandmother, you know, the only person who could say that to you, at one point said, you know, that accident might have been the best thing that ever happened to you, you know. Now, you would never accept that from anyone else, but sometimes in life, it's through adversity that another path opens. And, you know, one door never shuts, but another door opens. And it's just being calm enough to understand that and not be frantic in your career. Don't be frantic, because if you're frantic in your career, other people pick that up and they perceive that negatively as naked ambition. You know, there's no need to be frantic. You need to be alert. You need to take your opportunities, but don't be stressed by the very fact of having a career. And we should feel very privileged, all of us, to have the careers we have, to have the opportunities we have. We're so much luckier than most of the rest of our fellow human beings on the planet. So we shouldn't get too stressed about the occasional setback.
I think Katja has rejoined. Katja, you want to take the floor again?
Joachim, just go ahead with the next question, I would say.
No,
okay.
I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Katja.
That's it. Okay, I hope I don't get thrown out again. I was wondering, in terms of goals, when you started your career, did you have kind of set goals that you were aiming towards? Do you have goals now where you want to be in, I don't know, 5-10 years time? And from your experience, is it better to stick with one organization and kind of work your way upwards, or better to change organizations, get different experience, even though it may take you longer wherever it is that you want to get? Thank you.
I know exactly where I want to be in 5 years' time. That's in a very small little house on the wild west coast of Ireland, right on the west coast of Mayo. So that's where I want to be. So that's my answer. It's the rest of you have to pick up the flag now. I mean, Chikwe is new blood in WHO, which is wonderful. You and I, Marion, are becoming the elder statespersons of this game. So I know where I want to be. My life ambitions, my career ambitions are done. But I don't think anyone can have a career where if anyone says they've planned everything and it's come through exactly as planned, then I actually think they're probably lying to me. But that's my answer.
Yeah, I was going to say that I really wanted to be a vet. I really saw myself in veterinary practice until I was a vet and really experienced it. And I was like, this is, I'm not sure. I distinctly remember a weekend when I had the busiest weekend of all, full referrals, the whole weekend, didn't sleep, and I did not have to pick up a single book, or because I just knew it, and it was 3 years into, after my graduation, and I was like, this is not gonna be too satisfying for me. So that's when I decided to look for something else. And I think that's what you hear from many people, that you do something, you get good at it, and then at some point maybe you get an itch, maybe not, and that's fine too. So some people really are happy in what they do where they start out, and then that's fine too. But I think as long as you just act upon, okay, where am I? Is this where I want to be? If not, what's next? I think that's really the process. And whether that's in a single organization, it could work very well for some people. It doesn't work for others, and I don't think there's a single best way actually. But it's trying to find what where you fit, what works best for you. I think that's really the process that is important.
We have a question actually from Esther that I think is very interesting, and is changing a little bit on the topic, and is quoting you, Dr. Ryan, on the takes a village to raise a child. She says that she has a 20-month baby and another one in the way, and I think the question is about life and balance. You are all three very successful. That takes sacrifices a lot of times. And I think the question was guided towards what are your recommendations in that matter?
Yeah, no. First of all, you're a hero. That's challenging to and that's a particular challenge, I think, for professional women during a period of life when you want to have kids, and our systems really don't yet support that dual service to humanity. There's so many sacrifices that women make, particularly at that stage of career. We don't have the work style, the work practices. We don't have the supports in place to allow women to excel. And I think very often women can fall behind at that very important part of the career, and there's huge pressure. And women very often feel that pressure because I'm having kids and I love my kids and I want to have another kid. But if I do this, I'm not going to be able to put in the effort that all the other people are putting in, and I'm going to slip behind. And I think that's a lot of stress. But at the end of the day, in professional life, no one remembers you. No one knows your name, but your family remember you for generations. So, and all of us have made sacrifices with our families. We've all done that, and some of us have done it to great damage. So as an older person looking back, I would say prioritize your family. Career will take care of itself. But we need, in the professional side of things, and in the training side, and in the work side, to do a hell of a lot better at providing the environment in which everyone can thrive. And right now, the way work is set up, the way work practice is set up, and maybe teleworking and the whole COVID-19 pandemic may have given us a slightly more flexible approach to work and how people can contribute. But I think it's still a real challenge. And it's maybe something, EPIET and others need to look at. But no, that's really how I feel. I mean, your kids are a huge priority in your life and a huge gift to humanity. And you need to find that balance. But I know how difficult it is, and I know how stressful that is in terms of the trade-offs that come with doing that properly.
Well, I think this is also an issue for males, because what I see is men are equally. Of course, physically it's very different, but the sort of the young generations now, you see this stress in both sexes, which I think is great to see, and I think it's it's really a matter of, again, putting that on the table. I had a very interesting meeting or encounter when I was, at childbearing stage with an 80-year-old woman who just said, well, just do it. I mean, and she told me her story, and she had been working, she had an office job, and she just picked up her child, put out a drawer, made a bed in there, and just continued to work. That was a bit of an extreme story, but she really, what she was saying is, it's just everyone gets babies, so it's one of the issues that you deal with during your career, and you just put it on the table. And people also differ in how they want to do this, and how they, whether they want to step out for a while or continue to work full time. And again, that I don't think there's a single rule for everyone there. But I think what is needed is that well, we all talk about this professionally, because there's a lot of perceived barriers, but it's also a part of just making it normal by discussing as if it's normal. I think that's an important step to make as well.
Yeah, I think all the points have been made. It's really important that we all try hard, and I don't think there's one rule for all of us, but it's, yeah, Mike made the point very well, Marion as well, and we have to all keep trying, and don't ever pretend that it's not important and we can get back to it, because once you fail for a couple of years, you're not going back to anything you would have left you.
Yeah, very strong words, very nice, very encouraging. Yet again, changing the direction a little bit, it's a question about, are you frustrated when decision makers or your organization or your government or whoever you're talking to on the everyday basis, they do not follow your advice, which you believe that they are obviously scientifically sound and they should? And how do you deal with your frustration?
Mike, you are Mike. Was every day, probably.
That's every day. Yeah, that's. I think the first thing we have to remember, and I think it's the same. Doesn't matter if you're working in WHO or in a national environment. Science and evidence doesn't translate directly into policy, because there are so many other considerations between the two. There's cost. There's the trade-offs of other policies that may suffer with that policy. So I think sometimes we do a disservice to our politicians and our governments in the sense of saying we must be able to translate all of this evidence into immediate policy today. So therefore, when your proposals are not taking up immediately, don't see them as rejected. Just see that as the reality. Now, if it's happening, another phenomenon I see actually happening, which is more worrisome, quite frankly, than our evidence or our data not being used in driving policy, it's policy-driven data collection. And that's much more insidious, where policies are made in government and then the scientists are asked to produce the evidence to support the policy. And that's something you all need to watch out for. There's been a lot of this in this COVID pandemic, because that's where you can be compromised. If you go forward with your evidence or your proposals and they're rejected, there are many reasons why they would be rejected. Don't lose heart. Try again. Go back and look at how you messaged that. Go back and look at your communications. Go back and look at whether you built up the proper alliances, where you're speaking to the right people. There's a lot of things you can adjust. And if you need to go back, and if you feel strongly, go back, find another way. That's fine. But governments have to do what governments do. But be very wary when governments or anyone in power comes to you and asks you to generate the evidence or find the evidence to support a new policy that's already been decided, because that's something that I think has happened too frequently, certainly in this pandemic, in my view.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think really to emphasize the point Mike made, that a response, a negative one, is a response in a point in time. And if someone says no today, it doesn't mean he'll say no tomorrow or the next day. So it's our responsibility. It's not enough to just say, I've given my advice and you walk away. It's part of our responsibility to convince our stakeholders to go on a certain path or to meet them halfway. And, initially I don't know if training has changed now, but, initially we're just trained to deliver our evidence and do our papers and PowerPoints and stop there. But no, we've got to really learn negotiation, leadership, and how to convince people. And Mike is very right. In the part of the world I come from, there are hard trade-offs to be made, and all of them are legitimate trade-offs. Leaders have to decide on whether to invest on electricity, security, defense, or health. And all of them have legitimate advocates pushing, and rightly so. So we've got to find strategies, the skills to elevate the way we push for our agenda. Having said that, I don't think there's been any time in that we've had as much attention from our politicians as now, right? A few years ago, we would have had to explain to our leaders what an epidemiologist means. In every country, you hear everyone debating about what R naught means, and having detailed epidemiological debates on TV, across the streets. Politicians are interested. So I think there's a unique opportunity that we have at the moment, and one of the collateral benefits of the pandemic is that there's a lot more awareness about the work that we do. It comes with a lot of responsibility in how we use that newfound influence that we have, and we've got to use it very carefully and not take it for granted, because it also takes one bad mistake to lose it all.
Yeah, maybe if I may. So if the question was, do you get frustrated every now and then? Oh, definitely, definitely. And then what do you do? Well, so for me, what helps is just, sitting back. I'm married to a musician who can just say just the right things with a good glass of wine or whiskey, and then it's all, it is all, we do our best, but we're all, I like to think I'm also just a small piece radar in the whole machinery. Yes, I do make an effort, but sometimes you just have to step back and say, okay, chill, because it's important. It does. I think it's very important to, contact colleagues that are experienced, have similar experience. I've been in the National Outbreak Management Team for close to 2 years now, and we can call each other every now and then when you say, oh, I really need to rant a little bit now, and that's fine. We've had the same with the China mission team, which has been a little bit under a magnifying glass. You call each other, you discuss it, you make a joke, and then it's over. So that's what a network also is good for, I think.
Thanks a lot. We actually have two very good and interesting questions from Stine. Stine, do you want to take the floor?
Okay, can you hear me? I'm not going to turn off. Perfect. Thanks for a great session. I'm going to go with a question about how we keep our network strong. I did the EPIET program in 2008. Then we were like 13, 14 years into the program, and we heard about how it all changed. Now we're 26, 27 years in, and the program is growing and changing. I'm curious to hear your views on how do we keep this strong network alive through the changes that are happening. Do you have any ideas on that? Thank you.
Maybe I'll give it a shot. I think we all have great plans of staying in touch and meeting every week and or every month, and and the fact is that life always gets in the way, and we may not necessarily meet up formally as often as we thought we would. But, you know, I think this network stays in the heart, and whenever there's an opportunity to use it, you know, whether it's on the sidelines of conferences or when we meet in circles, and to make that extra effort to link up with colleagues and, you know, share a drink and share experiences. And these days, there are a lot more tools than there were in the early 2000s to network, right? So really, we need to do it. We need to do it a bit more, be a little bit more intentional, but sometimes also just allow things to happen organically. I think one thing we can do a little bit more, and it's always a problem when a network like ours grows, is the intergenerational networking, right? When we were, I mean, I was in cohort 9, and, you know, it's still a manageable number of people that you've got to know. And we still had events where, you know, people came from cohort 1, 2, 3. But now, you know, it's almost impossible to actually know who is an EPIET across board anymore. So whenever there's an opportunity for us to bring in colleagues that have joined the network more recently, I think it'll be great, and create the time and space for that.
So you're saying, Chikwe, we have to develop a secret handshake or something, is it? So we'll all recognize each other. We
didn't need that 20 years ago, but
I would say that, I mean, leaving aside the people who come through the program, EPIET or EUPHEM, I don't know if you say it as EUPHEM or EUPHEM. EUPHEM. Yeah. I mean, the reality is, and if you think back to this great experiment way back in the mid-90s, you know, when health was still very much a subsidiary issue, countries did not want to engage on health. You know, it was like taxes and health, foreign policy. These were things the European Union shouldn't be touching. And this EPIET program came along to cross-train people between different countries and different disciplines. You know, it was quite
absolutely
innovative. It was quite innovative thinking, and it wasn't necessarily going to work, because many people said to me, "Well, how is this going to work? You know, how is someone from Greece ever going to have a long-term career in Ireland, or someone from Germany going to have a long-term career in Spain?" I mean, it's really just fluff. It's just kind of making things look nice. And there were a lot of people who thought that it was just, and it would die away after a year or two, and it would be one of those 2-year projects. The very longevity of EPIET and EUPHEM has spoken to their success. And if you look at how many of us are peppered throughout not only the public health system, the academic system, senior positions all around Europe, affecting the future course of health in Europe and in the world, I think it speaks to its influence and its success. And I think if EPIET wants to survive and EUPHEM wants to survive, they need to evolve to continue to attract the highest quality graduates possible across as many disciplines as possible, and be very sensitive to what's going on in the world. Right now, the world is discussing future governance, future financing, the future systems that we're going to need. The EU is looking at that with the new Health Emergency Response Authority and integrating a lot of this stuff across the different disciplines, even within the European Union and the Commission. So EPIET needs to stay alive to how the European system is evolving, continue to attract the funding, and more importantly, and the real value of EPIET has not been the buildings in which the training have been done or the money, it's been the people and the absolute quality. A shout out there, Martha Valenciano just sent me a message from him, and people like Martha, so many other people, and we're all doing our thing, and some are in NGOs, and some are in government, some are in academia, some are in multilateral organizations, but we're as a group, I think, punching so far above what was even imagined in the beginning of the EPIET program. But you can't live on your past success. So I think it will be important that the programs evolve and take, as you said earlier, Chikwe, public health and One Health have never been more in the public eye, in the public consciousness. And if there ever was a time to strengthen commitment to these transnational training programs, now is the time. and to ensure that as the European Union looks at its investments in health in the coming 20 years, that the programs like this are central to their thinking. And that requires more than just doing good training. It means doing really good advocacy for the EPIET program. And I hope that people, certainly like myself and Chikwe, who happen to be in WHO, can help to do that advocacy. I know you do it every day, Marion, in the European environment, but I think that's where it's going to be important for the program now to evolve and take hold of the opportunities that are emerging in Europe and in the world.
Now that we're coming into the last 10 minutes of the session, time flies when you're having fun. Maybe we can switch to a bit more less serious questions. We covered lots of depths and heights. So Tim has a question which he's burning to ask. Would you take the floor, please?
Yes, I'm here. I won't switch on my camera though. So it's just this morning in the plenary, Peter Piot had Tintin's moon rocket standing behind him. And funnily, I find it funny to see that such advanced professional would have some childhood hero something behind him, and thinking about, I got into public health after reading a book on Alexander Yersin, for example. Did you have, as a professional when you were growing up, a hero or a role model that you looked up to or who inspired you? Over. That's a question for all three panelists, of course.
Oh, my childhood hero was Daktari. He was a veterinarian working in Africa, doing all sorts of cool adventures. So that's really what got me interested in veterinary medicine. Of course, it was a crazy, childhood role model, but it did really get me thinking about that as a profession. So.
Okay, tough question, but I grew up in a small university kind of campus town, and my father was the kind of campus doctor. But when you're the campus doctor, you're not just, you have public health. I didn't realize that, but right now on reflection, you have clinical and public health responsibilities. And I guess given his position as a physician, a bit revered, and but there wasn't a lot of money around, so he got rewarded by people bringing live chickens and goats to the house that we had running around outside. So I think, yeah, that the respect that medicine brought and the broader responsibilities of being responsible for the health of a fairly small population was enough to kind of attract one into this space.
Yeah, I think we all have different heroes at different stages of our lives, people who inspire us. So I think it depends on who you are. I mean, typical of Peter to have the Belgian superhero as his behind him. I'm a great fan of Tintin myself. So for me, I think it's a little bit like Peter. My hero as a kid was my dad, who was a seafarer, and he spent most of his life at sea. So I spent most of my childhood years sitting in the front room with my grandmother with all these mementos of his travel and pictures from all over the world and copies of National Geographic. So I lived in a small village in the west of Ireland, which was very traditional, and yet in this room it was like TARDIS. I was transported to this other place, this international environment, this very exciting place. But my true hero in life is my mum, because she lost my dad when she was young, and she raised 3 difficult young boys through very tough times, and I ended up in college. So she's my hero.
And I'm sure many will say the same about you in a few years. So be prepared for the next career session of 2050. But in this same vein, I think that we're reaching the end, and it would be nice to have some conclusion words from each one of you, given that there have been a lot of great thoughts brought up, and I think that a lot of the people that are here admire you, and it would be nice to have a final message from all of you, from each one of you.
I think these are extremely exciting times for people wanting to work in this space, because it's clear that just how, if anything, the pandemic made clear is put to the forefront what, for instance, Mike has been saying for many years, just how important this field is and how much more investment we need and how many people we need. And it is, I think, amazing to hear politicians explain the R naught of different variants and how to build that into their policy. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. So I think that excitement is there for all of you. And I'm sure that will. I mean, you already see programs coming up. What are what is the next phase agenda? How are we going to build that? There's pandemic centers popping up. There's the climate agenda coming up. So I think there's tons and tons of important work to do that will need all of you.
Thanks. I'll comment so Mike has the last word. I think really to be open to the opportunities that will come. And, you know, there's no linear path to anywhere anymore. Even most of us can't really predict how our landscape will look in 2-3 years, not to talk about 10-20 years, right? So really to be open to the opportunities, the challenges, the different windows that might be open or closed on your path, and keep pushing, and you'll find a way. You know, there was a question about setting goals. I really struggle with setting goals that are too far ahead. I think be honest to what you're doing at the moment, make the best of it. And, you know, amazing things will happen. That's definitely been my experience, and I'm honored, grateful to many people I see on the chat box that had a big role to play in my journey, and I hope I can support others as I see you grow as well. Over to you, Mike.
Great, no, that's very well said, Chikwe and Marion. I just, Ralph Renches is online there. He's one of my cohorts. And Ralph, he sums it up perfectly. He said, EPIET and EUPHEM is Europe as it should be. And I think that's very apt, because in a world that's tearing itself apart with nationalism and xenophobia and lack of inclusion, the European project is very important and has gained further importance as an experiment in inclusion. I come from a small island on the periphery of Europe, and I feel just as important as the big countries because of that principle. And I think that idea of inclusion and recognition of diversity, recognition of what the little places bring, recognition of what everybody brings to this project, and, you know, defining a better, more sustainable, more inclusive, fair future. I'm not saying that Europe is fair, and I'm not saying there aren't huge challenges with the experiment, but right now, in a world that's tearing itself apart, those of us who've been part of this great European experiment in training and fellowship have gained the benefits of it, and we try to take those messages to the rest of the world. So I think, so I do think you should all, those of you, you know, who are involved in these programs and other training programs, you know, be proud. You will have setbacks. Everything won't come the way you planned. And it is, I've seen many of you online there saying, you know, I've got my master's, I've been in the fellowship, and I'm finding it hard to get a job, and I'm not getting replies to my applications, and that's extremely frustrating. There should be room for everyone in this profession, and maybe we need to do a better job at the top end in creating those opportunities for people, because it is frustrating to give so much of your life to something and then find you can't get a job or an internship, you can't get your foot in the door. No job, no experience, no job. We've all been there. So I do feel for those people who feel, you know, even despite their commitment, marginalized and excluded from really contributing. So please don't give up hope. As Chikwe said, no is not no forever. Find a way to make your contribution.
And with these final words of Mike, and on behalf of this great European experiment, I would like to close the session with some of my concluding words. I made some notes tonight for some of the words. They were said, of course, yeah, it was difficult to take notes because I also wanted to pay attention. But if I may highlight some of the words, I feel they quite strongly describe the team, yeah, how we felt tonight, or how the panelists felt tonight. And some of these would be jack of all trades, master of none, multidisciplinary, variety, innovation, diversity, courage, flexibility. And somebody in the chat even compared us that, oh, we are like parasites. They are generalists yet specialists. I like this comparison quite. Tonight we had at maximum I've seen 158 people joined us. So thank you so much for everyone who contributed. And I really want to thank the panelists who were here tonight and shared your wisdom and your experience with us, and are also encouraging us to do what we do, to follow our instincts, and yeah, be courageous to speak up if it's necessary. And on behalf of our organization team, I would like to wish you good luck and, yeah, courage also to continue what you do best. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.